it's time for a Fender bass. We like Fender basses because they're predictable, somewhat reliable even. Actually, they're very reliable. Controversial opinion time. Leo Fender will go down in history as the inventor of the Stratocaster and related guitars. We all know that. But it's possible, maybe, that his single greatest contribution to the history of music might be the P-bass, the precision bass. You know, there were a couple of short-lived electric bass guitars made in very small numbers during the 1930s, but so few, the production so low that they didn't even make a blip, really. Nobody saw them, nobody played them. People continued to use the upright bass in every situation that you could fit one, unwieldy as they are. 1951 comes along. There were already lots of different electric guitars on the market at that point, but nobody was prepared for this thing. It blew minds. You mean I don't have to strap the bull fiddle on top of the Buick? Hoo-wee! Life got a lot easier. Being in tune got a lot easier. Frets are good for that. Being heard was something novel too. You could turn this thing up and be on equal terms with the drummer. So the adoption of the precision bass as the new standard took place overnight. The upright still had a place in early rockabilly, for instance, probably initially out of monetary reasons, but later on because of a pastiche or, devotion to the history of things. But by the end of the 1950s, unless you were in a serious jazz trio, if you were gigging and playing popular music, this was the choice. The hassle that accompanies the sheer size of the bass violin is something that nobody wanted to deal with. And small combos could tour a lot easier without it. And Leo Fender's early design, like the Telecaster, has been remarkably durable over the decades. There have been a few cosmetic changes to things like the body contours and stuff and the pickguard shape. The pickup design had a major shift in 1957 that gave us this hum-canceling split coil arrangement, which in itself was new and uncharacteristic for Fender at the time. They couldn't make a true dual coil humbucker as we know it, because Gibson's patent was very fresh. But what they came up with worked great. So this is an elegant workhorse. And this one, being from the mid-70s, is a horse that could work better at this point. There's some stuff going on with the setup, so let's get in close and look at it. First off, we should have a look at the bridge and remark to ourselves that the saddles seem pretty low to the bass plate. And in fact, the G string here is actually resting right on it, which is a configuration that we don't want. And usually that means something funny is going on somewhere else. Especially when we pair that with an action height at the 12th fret here that is 8/64ths on the bass side, 7/64ths on the treble. Now there are people, I know a number of them, who actually like to play their bass with the action this high. It just helps out their technique. They have specific requirements and it works, but most people are more comfortable with the action lower than that. And we'll check out the neck relief. I'm going to put a capo on the 1st fret with the guitar tilted into the position in which it's usually played. I'm going to depress the E string, hold that down somewhere around the body joint, and then using an automotive feeler gauge set, I'm going to determine how much space there is between the underside of the E string and the top of the fret in the region of the 6th and 7th frets. And the gap there is about 19 thousandths of an inch, which is just under 1/2 millimeter, and definitely more than twice what we'd like to see. So the very first thing we need to do is see if we can adjust the truss rod. We'll detune the strings. These are very old strings, and I've been told to save them and see if I can reuse them. Some players like dead bass strings, and this is one of those players. These things are apparently more than 20 years old. With the strings slackened, I can loosen the screws from the cover plate. Certainly don't try this with strings at full tension. That could be a surprise. It'll flip you right across the room. Obviously we've got some buckle wear here, and judging from the loss of paint around the outline of the plate here. I think this has come off a few times as well. So we're hoping no one's really messed with it. There are ways of adjusting this without taking the neck right out of the pocket. We can slacken but not entirely remove those front screws. Depending on the era, the neck can be a really tight fit in the pocket or it could be really loose. And in the 70s they tend to be more loose. This will give us access to the end of the neck and the truss rod nut, which as you can see appears to have been turned a good many times with various implements. Yeah, it's snug but tightenable. That's about a quarter of a turn. See what that did. I know it needs more than that, but let's sneak up on it. These screws should be snug, but not break your wrist tight. There's a possibility that you could either snap the heads off, which I've seen, or just strip them out. Improvement, we're down to 14 thousandths. We must tighten some more. I got it down to about 7 thousandths before the fear set in and I didn't want to turn the truss rod anymore. Action is now about 6/64ths. A considerable difference. We haven't touched the saddles yet. Using my notched straight edge here, I can see that there is a issue that's not uncommon and quite familiar to people who work on Fender guitars. There is a gap between the straight edge and the wood of the fretboard down here, and it disappears. And it looks to me like the top 3 or 4 frets are, the board is kicked up in this area, a sort of a ski jump situation. We call that a rising tongue. And that can often happen. There's a kink that forms where the end of the fretboard is being held to the body, and it's significantly more rigid than what's going on in this area. It sort of bends abruptly at this point, so that the string sees this area as pitched up higher relative to the rest of the neck. And we often get little buzzes up there, especially for playing with lower action. You might not hear it with 8/64ths, but with 5 or 6. That is certain to get worse as the strings come down if I want to lower the action any further. So we're going to have to take care of this area. It's nice to be able to compare that with what's going on with the surface of the frets. In my straight edge here, I can fit a 7 thousandths feeler gauge. This is a 12-inch or 300 millimeter rule. In this area, we'd like to see this flat, or maybe a small amount of fall away even at this end of the board. You know, they just naturally do this over time, a lot of them. Next question, could we dress off perhaps 5 thousandths height from these frets? And these appear to be approximately 39 thousandths. Yeah, 39, 37. The last fret's about 30 thousandths. And about 40 thousandths past the neck joint here. So it's likely these were dressed down slightly even at the factory or during some previous service. But there's enough, just enough for us to take those down and get this into a plane that we want. Which is a good thing, because the alternative is pulling the frets out and leveling the surface of the board. And in this case we have the veneer style board. There's not a whole lot of material there to dress away. We'd be right through it actually in the center of the board by the time we got it where we wanted it. So it's nice to have frets that are tall enough to take a little bit off. Now I've been told that this is a Japanese body, and I don't know how that identification was made. It's certainly missing the usual stamps and marks that we find in the neck pocket. You got a piece of veneer here. I tend to hold on to veneers that I find that are of sort of oddball thicknesses. This I think is elm actually, or something like it, which is about 30 thousandths, which is maybe 0.7 millimeters thick, which is thicker than your average veneer. standard thickness is usually around 20 thousandths, half a millimeter-ish. And I find that 30 thousandths is a good starting point for most of these things. It tends to, on a guitar of this size, raise the saddle height by about 2 millimeters after I've finished tapering it. These days I tend to not make the shim the full length. Reason being is that you always end up seeing it down at this end. And the other thing is, because it's tapered, you'd basically have to taper it away to nothing. And that never happens. There's always some thickness on this end here, and I find that any tiny little gap between here and the front screws is so minimal that it's not going to cause any distortion. And this of course differs mightily from the old traditional method of just putting a little shim down at the end of the neck here. Sometimes it's a guitar pick or a business card or something folded up. However, if it's of any thickness, say 40 thousandths or 1 millimeter, when you start screwing down the screws to the neck, it will bend this area up in a way that exacerbates any natural tendency for that ski jump we were talking about. If you got a big gap here, you're forcing the neck into a distortion. So it's better to have a much wider shim that tapers gently and basically prevents you from kinking the neck down in this area. Got this little bench hook here specifically for this task. And I've got tape on both surfaces. I'm going to super glue the shim in place while I sand it. Just the easiest way of holding the thing together. There's no way to clamp it while you're sanding it. Just a couple of spots of glue. I'll make a series of pencil lines just to let me know where I am in the course of sanding. And basically exaggerate the angle to begin with. I have to remove material at this end for a long time before it starts sneaking up. Alternately, we can use a cabinet scraper, which is a thin piece of steel. Get rid of the bulk of the material at the end. Peeling this off can be a delicate operation, especially at this end. Sometimes it helps to heat it up with the heat gun. With shim in position, I can use a screw to mark the hole locations. I'll use a brad point drill bit spinning in reverse to drill these holes. I'm just going to paint the edges with some black marker to make them less obvious on this side. It's always a good idea to add some penetrating lubricant to the adjustment screws before trying to move them. With the shim in the neck pocket, I now had to raise the saddles slightly to get enough clearance for the strings to sound, and I could tune them up because they were lying on top of the frets with the new neck angle. I put the bass in my neck jig, which is a device that has several supports under the neck and allowances for measuring the amount of relief or movement in the neck with and without string tension. And that'll hold it steady and maintain the shape the neck is in without strings on it, so I can go ahead and level this area. Now, I mean, there are ways of doing this without a neck jig. You can do it with the understring leveling guides, but this is easier, cleaner, and more secure. I can check with the straight edge and see that that little bit of clearance is still in there, and this is behaving the way it does under string tension. In much the same way that I do my neck setting sandpaper pulls, by pulling my leveling beam past the last fret, these frets are getting sanded continuously while these ones are no longer being touched. So more material is being removed off the end of the board than here. After dressing, I need to recrown them. And then onto the business of polishing, polishing, polishing. There is a chunk missing out of the treble side of the fingerboard about halfway down, and it offends both mine eye and mine hand. I'll fill this with a generous dollop of super glue and rosewood dust. Kind of sculpt it so that it fits the contours. I'll use a razor blade scraper and then sand and make it look pretty and feel good. It's been raised incorruptible. The bearing surfaces on the tuners could use a little bit of oil. And there we have it. The neck is straight. We've lowered the action by more than 40%, and it plays cleanly all the way up the board. Very nice bass.